USA wins gold, and we recap the medal games. We'll talk about Czechia versus Finland, USA versus Sweden, which draft eligibles performed, and a lot more on today's show of Locked On NHL Prospects.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this podcast, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday to Friday. I'm Hadi Kalikesh, back again after a long fight with COVID, which still isn't done, but we'll get through it. And my co-hosts here, Sebastian High, are more than happy to welcome you to the recap of the medal games of the World Junior Championship. We'll talk first about Czechia versus Finland. We'll also talk about USA versus Sweden, of course, as USA won the gold medal in that game. In our second segment, we'll talk about the draft eligibles that performed. We'll talk about Macklin Celebrini, Zeev Buyum, Jesse Pulkkinen, and a lot more. And we'll end things off by building our teams of the tournament. So we've each drafted a team of the tournament, and we'll introduce that, talk about what differences we have. We have completely different teams each, so that tells you that there's a lot of players who performed really well in this tournament. But before we get into any of that, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. So let's get things started here. I think we can start with the bronze medal game because for me, it was the most tantalizing of the two. I mean, that was from start to finish was just a ride, right?
Oh, it was such a fun game. I had a blast watching that one. It was just such a pure back and forth and a comeback for the ages. I don't think I've watched a crazier final 3 minutes of a hockey game in any scouting work in the last 3 years. It was wild.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it started off with Finland, I think, going up 2-0.
Yeah, very early on, yeah.
Czechia came back in that one. Finland immediately regained their 2-goal lead and then added another to be winning 5-2. And then Czechia just decided they were going to score goals. They scored 4 goals in a row at 5-on-5. I think, or maybe one of them was in what was on the power play. But regardless, they scored 4 goals in a row to make it 6-5 for them, and added 2 empty netters to win the game 8-5. I from start to finish, I was just like, what is happening here? Everything was happening at the same time. But yeah, I mean, the difference maker for me was that Czechia's best players were their best players, and some of their fringe performers, guys who didn't really get the limelight too much in previous games, especially if we look back to their first game against Slovakia, those players stepped up as well. I thought Tomáš Galvis, who wasn't even in the initial roster and got called up only because Adam Jiricek was injured. On defense, he had a fantastic game. Was really reliable on the breakout, was jump starting plays continuously, and overall had a fantastic game. But it's the big guns for them. It was Yuri Kulik and Marek Alsher who were the two main kind of big players from that game, and yeah, both of them worked their butts off and made this possible for Czechia, right?
Oh, for sure. And as you mentioned, you had other peripheral players in that lineup really come to play. I thought that Ondrej Becker and Dominic Rimon had fantastic performances here as well. And they've been really good throughout the tournament, but they saved their best games respectively for the final game. And I don't think I've seen, I can't remember seeing a World Junior team winning the bronze medal being as fulfilled and excited to be on the podium as this Czech team, because it was not only a comeback in this game, but in the tournament as a whole. I mean, they started off the first game of the entire tournament losing to their arch rivals 6-2. Yeah. Now they fight their way back tooth and nail to get onto the podium. Overall, it's a really fun story.
100%. And I feel a bit vindicated here because remember that conversation we had before the tournament about Czechia versus Slovakia? Who's better? Who's going to perform better at this tournament?
You mean the one where I took a victory lap after they won
the 6-2 Slovakia game? Yeah, I'm talking about that one.
Early,
yeah,
maybe. Yeah,
a tiny bit early because my team won bronze and yours lost in the quarterfinals. But anyway,
that's fair.
Absolutely. But yeah, this was a fantastic game, and for me, I mean, like you said, there were some key like I said, there were some key players that, were the big guys that were supposed to be the big guys for Czechia that played well, but also their peripheral players, the players who, headed into this with a point to prove their point essentially, and that was really key for Czechia. But this is no knock on Finland's game; they were fantastic from start to finish as well. They just took their foot off the gas for a second, and you can't do that in World Juniors. You just can't. Yes, Pulkkinen had an amazing game. I thought Konsta Helenius was really, really good, and we'll talk about that later on. But he's a player who, throughout the whole tournament, did not really put up that many points, but was one of Finland's best players overall in terms of his ability to drive play, to create chances. Like, he was really, really good. But yeah, moving on to USA versus Sweden, the gold medal game. USA won that game 6-2, and it was close for a certain amount of time, like maybe a period and a half through the game. It was more or less kind of a close game. Sweden's defense was keeping them in there. Sweden's structure was hard to break, but USA started doing all the right things to break structures, which is play with pace, drive the middle at all costs, create chaos, put pucks on net, crash the net, like everything you need to do as a team that's skilled against a team that's structured, they were doing. The game plan was clear. And yeah, they kind of took this game by the horns about halfway through and ended up winning the game 6-2, winning the gold medal. And yeah, some top performers are there. Isaac Howard kept his best performance for his last game, even though money this whole tournament. Like, that was a spotlight, right? And outside of that, I mean, just the depth of skill in this roster was just so obvious, right?
It was the most skilled roster on paper coming into the tournament, and we talked about that quite extensively before it all kicked off. But yeah, the lineup really came to play in this gold medal game, and you saw production come from top to bottom. I thought, as you mentioned, Ike Howard had a fantastic game, and I thought that he was really key to the American game plan in terms of using their speed on the wings to try to get behind the Swedish defense, because that Swedish defensive core is just so dominant with play in front of them. They are very, very good at defending the rush when they're able to get body positioning. But Isaac Howard was making it a consistent effort on every single shift to blow by the defenders along the boards and then cut inside afterwards to really try to stretch the ice.
Yeah.
And that worked out really nicely on that first goal, especially of his. And as you said, I think that the States adapted really well with their game plan mid-game, just as they did in the semifinals. Like, I think in terms of like mid-game adaptations from a coaching standpoint, no team could quite rival the U.S. in this tournament.
Absolutely. And you compare that with how Canada tried to adapt when they were struggling. Night and day. I mean, Canada, it felt more like just throwing everything on the board and seeing what sticks, like just mashing up your lines, but still sticking to the same kind of rudimentary, like fundamental elements, right?
Yes.
In terms of structure, in terms of, the type of game that they play, in terms of what they do on the ice, like pretty much the same, but they were just like mashing up their lines. Whereas USA, they kept lines that work together. That Nazar, Brindley, Howard line stayed together all tournament. The Perot, Smith, Leonard line stayed together all tournament. And I think that was key, is building that chemistry, because it's already so difficult to build chemistry in like a 7-game tournament. But when you're able to do it, it makes such a major difference. And yeah, I felt like that was an important thing. And you look at like basically the only line that worked for Canada, it was the Beck, Danielson, Allard line, which basically stayed together all tournament. So it's like, yeah,
consistency is important. Yeah,
absolutely.
Like, it really is. And I mean, like with the States especially, the only like real shift in terms of the forward lines that you saw was dropping Jimmy Snuggerud to the fourth and bringing Oliver Moore up instead. Yeah. Which, I mean, when you have Oliver Moore sitting as your 13th forward and you have the option of bringing him in for a more of a two-way influence and more of a playmaking style on that top line,
yeah,
you can do it. It's great. And that worked so nicely in those last couple of games of the tournament. I thought that Moore was just an excellent fit there with Cutter Gauthier on that top line. Was really providing a ton of defensive support. Who's often dropping into the center role as in the defensive zone, freeing up Cutter Gauthier to kind of cheat a little bit more offensively, which helped him really unlock some levels of offensive play in the later like elimination games of the tournament that weren't really there earlier on, even though the production was still quite good because the States were scoring a bunch of goals. But he was far more impactful once he had a defensive player on his line. So
Oh, 100%.
I like the model of keeping lines consistent while also making some rather deliberate adaptations in terms of freeing up your start players to play with more freedom and skill, which is what they do best.
Absolutely. And yeah, that wraps things up for our first segment. We'll get into our second, where we talk about some draft eligibles who performed well at this tournament. And we'll just kind of overview all of them really quickly and just kind of give them a grade and talk about their performances. We'll get into that right after these messages from our sponsors over at Game Time. If you're looking to buy cheap tickets at last minute for any event, Game Time has you covered. Game Time is the best place to buy some tickets last minute. I know very well because I use them all the time. Whenever I've got a free afternoon out of nowhere, which can happen fairly often with my schedule, and I want to buy some tickets the same day for an event and get there as soon as possible and cash in those tickets. Game Time is really good for that. They've got tickets up until the last minute of events and even sometimes an hour after they start. They've got a bunch of deals to help you save money as well. So with zone deals, you pick the section and Game Time picks the seats, and that gives you an average of about 18% of savings. And the Game Time guarantee means that you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less than what Game Time has to offer you, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, but again, really simple. Just create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Alrighty, so moving on to our second segment, we'll talk about some draft eligibles who performed well at this tournament. Kind of, overview most of them, or basically all of them that were of note at this tournament, and kind of talk about the performances. And we can obviously start with Macklin Celebrini. Celebrini was, for me, the best player on Team Canada. Period. I don't think there was anyone who competed with his ability to impact the score sheet night in and night out, and his ability to just drive play consistently. He's a player who's terrifying to play against, right? Just he attacks downhill time and time again. He drives the middle time and time again. He is so overwhelming as a player. And yeah, this worked really well at this tournament, right?
It really did. He was really showing off his high-end level of pace and creativity, and more than anything, in my mind, decisiveness with the puck. He's
Yep.
incredibly efficient, incredibly decisive. He doesn't waste a single movement in doing what he wants to do. He has a very clear goal in mind whenever he has the puck on his stick, and he has all the tools in the world to try to create openings, which he then can really quickly and ferociously go attack. So
Yeah.
I thought he was tremendous in this tournament, by far Canada's most creative and dynamic player. And I think, as you said, he's quite easily their best player as well. I thought Denton Matejchuk would be the other player that I'd throw into that discussion. I thought that Matejchuk was one of the better defensemen in this tournament, but
Yeah.
Macklin Celebrini is continuing a very solid case to be made for a slam dunk pick at number 1 overall in 2024.
Absolutely. And yeah, we can move on to Zeev Buyum, who was fantastic for USA. He gets a grade of 5. By the way, Celebrini gets a 4.5. Mainly just because that little point and little half point he's missing is mainly just not being able to step it up even further and drag Canada to a medal game. But it is what it is.
And against the better teams in the tournament. Like, I think
Yeah.
7 of his points came against like
Latvia.
Latvia and Germany.
Yeah.
So like, yeah.
It's hard, but yeah, Zeev Buyum was just amazing in every game. He scored the insurance marker in the game against Sweden, and overall was just unsolvable. I think, like, just defensively, you could really see that the only reason Buyum's defensive performances aren't up to par in Denver is just because he's choosing to focus on offense. Because when he chooses to focus on defense, he's just so difficult to get around. He's so mobile, but doesn't use it kind of absent-mindedly. He problem solves his way into good positions. And yeah, just overall, I was so impressed with him. He gets a grade of 5 because honestly, there's an argument for him being at least a top 2 best defenseman in that roster as an 18-year-old at this tournament, which is ridiculous. But I also want to talk about Jesse Pulkkinen for Finland, who was, for me, their best player, and I don't think it was even close. He gets a grade of 5, was just an absolute monster in every situation, offensively, defensively, off the puck, with the puck, you name it. He was just I mean, I was looking at Mitch Brown and Lassie Allenen's track data for elite prospects on their Patreon, and there wasn't a single category in which he was under 90. Like he was just he
Yeah.
impacted every facet of the game, like at an elite level at this tournament. And yeah, just he's getting drafted in the top 50 for sure in the 2024
Yeah.
NHL draft, which is
Easily.
weird after getting passed over like an entire like no one was talking about Jesse Pulkkinen yet last year in his draft year, and now he's a top 50
Yeah.
player. It's absurd.
I
The player
mean,
development is weird.
according to our Finnish scout over at Dobber, Annie Karvinen,
Mhm.
Pulkkinen wasn't taking hockey all that super seriously last year, or something that he like apparently like enjoyed doing, but wasn't like perhaps like this framed internally as like this career that he's going to give his all to pursue. And
Yeah.
that like over the summer he kind of just made the decision to give it a bigger shot, and this is him trying, and he's
Wow.
good. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Moving on to Konsta Helenius, 4.0. He was really, really good. It's just the points don't reflect that.
Yeah.
Overall, he was just a player who was all over the place, doing really, really good things offensively, defensively. He started off as the first line center, ended up as the second line center for Finland, but still, I mean, his performances throughout the tournament were fantastic. And, you know, if you just watch the score sheet, he's dropping down your rankings. If you watch the actual games, he's moving up your rankings. Like he was really, really good at this tournament. But the lack of points keeps him at 4.0. A quick word on Emil Hemming, who was also in this Finnish roster. If you might have forgotten given his performances, but yeah, he was unnoticeable. So we give him a 2.
Yes.
Not its best games ever, and yeah, he just did not really impact the game in a really reliable way. For Norway, though, we've got 2 players.
Ooh.
We started off with one, which was Michael Brensek Newgard. I gave him a 4 mainly because I saw a drastic difference in his effort level between his Allsvenskan games and his Norway games, and I know that they played 4 games in 5 days and all that, but with with elimination, on the brink of elimination and relegation from this division of World Juniors, I thought Michael Brensek Newgard would give it a bigger shot, and he certainly, stepped up offensively. But in terms of his overall impact on the game, I was not really too impressed. And I think that's something that scouts have brought up. Talking with people in the industry, scouts have brought up the lack of effort and the lack of drive in Michael Brensek Newgard's game at this tournament, and I think that might actually drop him down instead of keep him up some rosters. But yeah, we'll see how that goes. Stian
Mm.
Solberg, which was a player who I didn't really have on my radar heading into this. For me, it was the best defenseman on Norway, and I'd say the best defenseman among the lesser countries. Him and Rodwin Dionicio, I think, are the only 2 from outside of the top 5. I'd say that were
Yeah.
really, really impressive, right?
For sure. I mean, I think like Dionicio blew blew Silver out of the water with his performances. I thought
Yeah,
that Dionicio was one of like the 4 or 5 best defensemen in the tournament, bar none. But Solberg, especially for a draft eligible who wasn't exactly on many radars coming into this tournament, really, really impressive performances. Playing with like a giddy viciousness, he really enjoys to inflict pain upon his opponents. He's really painful to play against. He's not fun to play against, and he thrives in that type of environment where he can be that annoying to play against. So that
yeah,
was kind of enjoyable for me to watch throughout the tournament, because you saw teams like as the games progressed against Norway, by like the 3rd period when a team was getting accustomed to Solberg, you always saw them going off the other side of the defensive, always trying
yeah.
to avoid him
You
at all
can't get around
costs.
them. It was just not
It's just
working at
not
all.
fun, and like if you're gonna get hit, like maybe you can get a play done like with just enough time to get a pass through, but you're gonna get hit no matter what. And on top of that, I thought that he was playing some really controlled hockey as well. Like he was really reliable also as a puck carrier for Norway, really solid distributor from the back end. Wasn't trying to do too much on his own up until maybe the last game of the tournament. Like by the time when he was playing his 4th game in 5 days and he logged like 24 to 27 minutes in every single one of them, he looked really tired.
Yeah.
He had nothing left in the tank by the end, but he had some excellent performances here for Norway.
Absolutely, and I think overall, I mean, there's a difference between Solberg with the puck and without the puck, in the sense that Solberg with the puck tends to make some mistakes, and I think that that's going to be a consistent kind of thing as we continue kind of tracking his games. But yeah, moving forward, we've got 3 defensemen left in this breakdown of the draft eligibles of this tournament. Tomas Galvis, who was called up in relief for Adam Juracek, who was severely injured within the first game. I mean, he's out for the rest of the season, probably some sort of crucial ligament tear, which is always very difficult. But yeah, Tomáš Galvis, another draft eligible defenseman for Czechia, was called up in his stead and played extremely well. I thought breakout ability top notch. There was a specific assist he got on Yuri Kulich's goal.
Oh, yeah.
That was just like he just
End to
pushed
end.
his way end to end into the offensive zone, and the confidence to do that as a draft eligible defenseman who wasn't on the initial roster is amazing. But another player who reminds me a lot of Tomáš Galvis, I think that they play very similar styles, would be Switzerland's Daniil Ustinkov. Ustinkov is really impressive in this as well. He's always another really mobile defenseman who likes to push the pace, who's comfortable defending the rush, can improve his in-zone game. But yeah, Galvish got a 4.0. Ustinkov got a 3.5. And to end things off, a player I thought I would really be impressed with at this tournament, but ended up kind of being underwhelming, would be Leon Mugli. Mugli, I've been talking to people who follow the Swiss National League, who scout overseas, especially are really good at scouting defensemen, and they were talking him up, telling me that this player is going to push himself into the top 50 by the end of the year, yada yada yada. This tournament did not really give me much promise. And, I have caught a couple league games and haven't really seen much in that end as well. So it's just, yeah, we give him a 2.0 for this tournament. But I'm hoping his return to Switzerland gives a bit more hope and a bit more reason to these kind of discussions I've been having with scouts overseas. But yeah, that wraps things up for our draft eligible players from this tournament and how they performed. We'll end things off with our teams of the tournament, talking through the players that we think performed the best. We'll choose 3 forwards, 2 defensemen, and a goaltender to build a team of the tournament after these messages from our sponsors over at FanDuel.
The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 money line bet. That's $150, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many ways to bet, ranging from spreads to player props to over and unders and far more. Whether you want to bet on your favorite team to win the Super Bowl this year or your favorite quarterback to throw for a couple of touchdowns in the next game, the choice is yours. While I myself am not the biggest sports bettor, when I go to a live game, it can kind of heighten the tension a bit, making it all the more exciting, and is just a fun tool for sports fans to get even closer to the action. So visit FanDuel.com/lockdown and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
Alrighty, so ending things off with our teams of the tournament. Spoiler, we have completely different teams of the tournament. Not a single one of our players matches up, and that gives you a good idea of how good this group of players was overall and how many different players performed at the top of their games at this tournament. We'll start things off with our forward cores. I went with Cutter Gauthier on left wing, Noah Östlund at center, Yuri Kulich at right wing, and I know Cutter Gauthier played most of the tournament at center. I just have to choose a forward on the left side. I don't really like any of the left wingers available. So I went with Cutter Gauthier on the left side. But you went with two different USA players than Cutter Gauthier. Do you want to talk about that?
For sure. First of all, I find it funny that neither of us chose the MVP of the tournament in either of our lineups here. Even though Jonathan Lekkerimäki did have a very, very good tournament, it wasn't quite enough to crack either of ours, but he definitely is an HM for us. So I went with Gabe Perreault and Frank Nazar as my 2 USA forwards, and finishing off that trio with Philip Machar. I thought that those 3 players were 3 players that not only were among the best players at the tournament, bar none, but were also some of the biggest, not surprises, but perhaps exceeded expectations the most. Both like overall and also my own personal ones. Like Gabe Perreault was just so consistent for the States. He was always in the right place wherever they needed him to be. Consistent goal scoring threat, not because he has a very good shot, but because he's always in dangerous areas. And the playmaking ability is just always so impressive, as well as the handling. And I think that his game is really starting to come into its own, and definitely helped that he was still on the same line that he was so comfortable on last year with that NTP line. And then Frank Nazar, for his part, had a really tough season last year, being out with injury almost the entire year. this year hasn't been the quickest of starts for him, but at this tournament, he was perhaps the most impactful forward all around the ice. Like in terms of 200-foot forwards at this tournament, I can't name you one that was more impactful than Frank Nazar. He was he was the biggest penalty kill piece for the States among the forward core, was one of their best playmakers, and wasn't even really getting involved much on the power play or as a goal scorer, but he didn't need to in order to have a huge impact. So his versatility and his ability to just bring value in whatever role he was put in this tournament definitely has him as one of the standouts in my eyes. And then Filip Mesar, dynamic as anything in this tournament, creating everything that Slovakia had to offer. A great 1-2 punch with Servets Petrovsky on that line, where Petrovsky was kind of freeing up Mesar to play as that like high octane offensive player because he had some more defensive support, and also free him up to be a raw playmaker rather than a goal scorer, which I think also like goes to Mesar's strengths. So
Oh,
those would be
absolutely.
my three forwards here.
For sure. I went with Goche instead of those two Americans, maybe just because Goche really stepped it up in the last couple games. But
He did.
Nazar was such a great pick here because yeah, he was overwhelming in every game. The playmaking force on this stacked USA roster. I mean, for me, he was the best playmaker on, and being the best playmaker on this roster is a feat in and of itself. But yeah,
Oh, yeah.
overall, Noah Östlund is in there just because I can't name you a player who's just more dynamic and impactful on every shift than Östlund was. Östlund was the main reason Lekkerimaki was able to put up this many goals. That and just Lekkerimaki being a fantastic power play scorer, but
Yeah.
Östlund overall was more impactful to Sweden's performances than
I agree.
Lekkerimaki was. Then for me, Yuri Kulik was just, I was really disappointed in him in the first game, but everything since that first game against Slovakia, fantastic, A+, great performances. Moving on to the defense, I went with Lane Hudson and Axel Sandin Pellikka as my defense pair. I know that Lane Hudson did not have the best tournament overall, but he was playing a different role. And in the role he was playing, he was amazing. Um, he was placed in kind of a defensive situation. He was playing almost 30 minutes a night regularly. He played 54 minutes in a 24-hour span between the semifinals and finals. And yeah, he was in every situation and was making great plays in every situation. So overall, Hudson takes the cake for me. And then Axel Sandin Pellikka I thought was the best defenseman for Sweden, and overall was just so difficult to play against. And I know we talked about Axel Sandin Pellikka as a right-handed defenseman who's more offensive leaning. He's got that offensive streak to his game. I thought the defensive side of his game was more impressive in this tournament. He was
I agree.
so reliable defensively. And yeah, any defenseman from Sweden could have made this, but for me, Axel Sandin Pellikka
Yeah.
takes a cake.
Yeah, there's so many players on the defensive core for Sweden. We could have just put like the Sweden D core as like our
Yeah.
defensive starts of the tournament, and that would have been just fine.
Uh-huh.
But I went with Jesse Pulkkinen because he was insanely good in this tournament. I mean,
Yep.
the tools are really impressive. The way that he's able to use his reach to cover ice defensively, but also protect the puck offensively. He was really like activating consistently in the offensive zone. He was one of Finland's biggest creative forces, and he was their most like stable and reliable defensive piece as well. So he was just quite clearly Finland's MVP in this tournament in my eyes. So
Yeah.
he deserves a mention. And the other one is Denton Matejchuk, a rare Canadian shutout here in the stars of the tournament. Because it was not Canada's best effort, but Matejchuk had a really solid tournament, and there's a reason that he hung around in training camp for a long time with the Columbus Blue Jackets a couple months ago. So
Yeah.
he's one of the most mature and dynamic players they can find in the WHL. So that was really evident in this tournament. I thought that he was super impactful in all three zones.
Absolutely. And we end things off with the goaltenders here. It was a toss up really. I went with Hugo Havelid, you went with Trey Augustine, and
Yeah,
honestly either one I would have
coin
been
toss.
fine with. It was really, I mean, it was a tight decision between those two. But overall, I thought Augustine was excellent in this tournament. And I would have liked to see a bit more Jacob Fowler in this tournament for, biased reasons. But
Yes.
Augustine was just an insurmountable. And yeah, Hugo Havelit's getting drafted this year. There's no way. There's no way he stays undrafted. But that wraps things up for today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe. Leave us a comment letting us know what you want us to talk about next. And if you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, make sure to make us your first listen of the day. For your second listen of the day, make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. They got all your news and updates about what's going on around sports on a 24/7 news channel over on YouTube. And make sure to tune in for our next episodes as we kind of wrap things up for our draft coverage, get ready for our rankings that are going to be coming up at Dauber Prospects soon and talk about those. This has been Hattie Kalakash with Sebastian Nahai, and we hope you tune in next time.